My phone lit up with a voice message from my sister Cassandra at 10:43 p.m. on a Tuesday night. Listen, Natalie, I've been thinking about the wedding guest list, and honestly, I think it would be better if you didn't come. You just, you don't really fit with the vibe we're going for. Ryan's family is very successful, very put together, and I need everyone there to reflect the life we're building together. Let us know in the comments where you're watching. If this resonated, don't miss out on subscribing because tomorrow I'm sharing something that will completely change how you think about this topic. Little did she know, I was about to cancel Willow Crest Manor, the luxury estate where she'd been planning her dream wedding for the past 10 months, because I owned it. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. And if this resonates with you, make sure you hit that subscribe button because tomorrow, I've got an even more shocking story about family assumptions that will absolutely blow your mind. I sat there in my home office in the hills of Maplewood Heights, staring at my phone screen while surrounded by contracts and financial documents that told a completely different story than what my family believed about my life. At 29, I was supposedly the family disappointment, the sister who had wasted her marketing degree working at some small local business, still living in what they assumed was a tiny rental apartment, driving a modest Toyota Camry that was 4 years old. What they didn't know was that my small local business was actually Pinnacle Hospitality Group, a luxury event and venue management company I'd built from absolutely nothing into a $38 million empire over the past 7 years. The company that owned and operated 15 premium wedding venues across 3 states, including Willow Crest Manor, the breathtaking lakefront estate with sprawling gardens and a historic mansion where Cassandra was supposed to marry her fiancé Ryan Pemberton this coming Saturday. I leaned back in my leather chair, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my actual home, a custom-designed contemporary house sitting on 23 acres of private waterfront property, worth more than my parents' house, Cassandra's new townhouse, and Ryan's condo combined. The irony wasn't lost on me that while my family spent years pitying me for what they saw as my struggling lifestyle, I had been quietly building something extraordinary that none of them could have imagined. The voice message from Cassandra was just the culmination of months of increasing hostility that had been building since she'd announced her engagement to Ryan Pemberton, a pharmaceutical sales manager she'd met at a medical conference in Denver. From the very first day she started planning this wedding, Cassandra had made it crystal clear that she wanted everything to be absolutely perfect. And somehow, my presence threatened that perfection in her mind. Natalie just doesn't understand the aesthetic I'm trying to create, she'd told our mother during a phone call last month, not realizing I could hear every word through the kitchen door. Ryan's family is very successful, very put together, and I need everyone there to reflect the life we're building together. Our mother, Patricia Blackwell, had tried to mediate between us, but even she shared Cassandra's concerns about my supposed situation. She'd said, maybe Natalie could help with some of the behind-the-scenes coordination. She does have experience with events, even if it's just small-scale local stuff. Small-scale local stuff. If they only knew that my small-scale local stuff included managing the governor's niece's wedding last spring or coordinating the tech billionaire Harrison Webb's anniversary celebration in Martha's Vineyard just 6 weeks ago. But I'd learned years ago that trying to explain my actual success to my family only led to accusations of lying, showing off, or living in a fantasy world. It had become so much easier to just let them assume whatever they wanted to assume about my life and focus on building my business empire in peace. The final breaking point had come 3 weeks ago during what was supposed to be Cassandra's bridal shower at the Rosewood Country Club. I'd arrived wearing a simple navy dress and understated jewelry, my usual elegant but low-key style that my family had long interpreted as me trying to look expensive on a discount budget. Ryan's parents, Dr. Kenneth and Mrs. Caroline Pemberton, were everything Cassandra had described them as. wealthy, well-connected, and absolutely obsessed with appearances and social positioning. They had spent the entire afternoon discussing their recent month-long vacation to their summer home in the Hamptons, their son's promising career trajectory in pharmaceutical sales, and their extensive network of successful friends and business associates. When the conversation had turned to family introductions, things had gone downhill fast. "And what do you do, Natalie?" Caroline had asked with that particular tone that suggested she already knew the answer wouldn't be impressive. "I work in event management," I replied simply, keeping my response deliberately vague. "Oh, how lovely," she'd responded with one of those smiles that doesn't reach the eyes at all. "Local weddings and birthday parties, that sort of thing?" Before I could even attempt to answer, Cassandra had immediately jumped in to control the narrative. "Natalie works for a small event planning company here in town. Nothing too fancy or high profile, but she's good at organizing basic things." The dismissive tone in her voice had been unmistakable, and I'd felt every word like a physical slap across my face. What followed was a painful 25 minutes of the Pembertons discussing their own extensive event planning experiences, the charity galas they'd hosted for 500 guests, the corporate events they'd attended with Fortune 500 executives, the real event planners they'd worked with for truly significant occasions. Each story was clearly intended to illustrate the vast difference between their sophisticated world and what they assumed was my small-time local operation. The moment that had truly shattered everything came when Carolyn mentioned their original venue choice for the wedding. "We initially wanted to hold the ceremony at Willowcrest Manor," she'd said, practically glowing with excitement. "It's absolutely stunning, right on Lake Serenity, with those gorgeous historic gardens and that magnificent mansion. But it's incredibly exclusive, you know. There's apparently a waiting list that's years long, and they only work with certain elite planning companies. We tried to book it, but they told us they were completely booked for the next 18 months. I had nearly choked on my champagne. Willowcrest Manor had been fully booked because I'd made the strategic business decision 8 months ago to limit our premium venues to only 12 weddings per year, focusing exclusively on ultra-high-end events that maintained our reputation for absolute exclusivity and luxury. The Pembertons had been politely turned away, not because of any waiting list, but because their initial inquiry had come through a budget planning service that didn't meet our minimum standards for client coordination." "Well," Dr. Kenneth had said with obvious pride, "Ryan and Cassandra found something even better. Willowcrest Manor might be exclusive, but Groundview Gardens has its own special charm. And the fact that it was available on their date just proves they were meant to be married there." Groundview Gardens. The venue Cassandra had booked after being rejected by Willowcrest, the venue she'd spent months describing as even more perfect than her original choice. The venue that was, of course, also part of my portfolio, one of the premier properties I'd acquired and completely renovated over the past 4 years. That's when Cassandra had decided to deliver what she clearly intended as the final blow to any remaining illusions about family unity. If you're loving what you're hearing, smash that subscribe button. It really keeps us going. All right, let's jump back in. "Actually," Cassandra had announced at the bridal shower, her voice carrying clearly across the private dining room at Rosewood Country Club, "I need to make something clear about the wedding." Everyone had turned to look at her, expecting perhaps a sweet speech about love and gratitude. Instead, she'd looked directly at me with something that bordered on contempt. "I've been thinking really hard about the guest list and the overall atmosphere I want to create for my special day. This wedding represents the beginning of Ryan's and my life together, and I need everyone there to reflect the kind of people we are and the success we've achieved." She'd paused dramatically, clearly enjoying having the full attention of the room. "Natalie, I'm sorry, but I don't think you should come to the wedding. It's nothing personal against you as a person, but Ryan's family and all our friends are professionals at a certain level, and I don't want anyone feeling awkward or out of place." The silence that had followed was absolutely deafening. Our parents had looked mortified. Ryan's parents had exchanged glances that suggested they weren't entirely surprised by this announcement. And I had sat there processing the fact that my own sister had just uninvited me from her wedding because she was genuinely ashamed of what she believed my life looked like.
But to understand how we'd reached that devastating moment, I need to explain how my family had systematically constructed their version of my reality over the past 7 years. The narrative they'd built was so detailed and so far from the truth that it was almost impressive in its complete wrongness. It had all started during my final year at Fairfield University. While my classmates were interviewing for entry-level corporate positions and talking about their post-graduation plans, I'd been quietly working on a comprehensive business plan that would eventually become Pinnacle Hospitality Group. My family had observed my secretive behavior, my late-night computer sessions, and my mysterious phone calls, and they'd interpreted all of it as signs that I was either struggling academically or having serious social problems. Natalie's always been a bit of a loner, my mother would tell concerned relatives who asked about my plans after graduation. She's very independent, maybe too independent. Sometimes I worry that she doesn't know how to ask for help when she really needs it. The truth was that I'd been meeting with potential investors, conducting detailed market research, studying industry analytics, and developing relationships with vendors and property owners. But when I graduated and immediately started working 18-hour days, my family had interpreted this as desperation rather than ambition. Cassandra, who was 4 years older and had followed the completely traditional path, sorority vice president, business administration degree, immediate corporate marketing job, engagement to her college boyfriend, had appointed herself as my unofficial life coach and career counselor. She'd spent the last 7 years offering constant unsolicited advice about my career choices, my appearance, my social life, and my financial decisions.
The problem with Natalie, she'd explained to our cousin Jessica at last year's Christmas dinner, is that she doesn't understand how networking actually works in the real world. She thinks that working hard is enough to get ahead, but you need the right connections and social skills to really succeed in business. She's stuck in this entry-level mindset where she believes effort matters more than relationships. Entry-level mindset. This from a woman whose idea of a major strategic business decision was choosing between two pre-approved marketing campaigns that had been developed by her company's corporate headquarters in Chicago. The family narrative about my supposed failures had solidified around several key misconceptions about every aspect of my life. My career situation was the foundation of their concerns. They believed I worked for someone else's small event planning company, probably making around $40,000 a year with no real advancement opportunities. When I tried to explain early on that I actually owned my own business, they'd assumed I meant I was freelancing or running some kind of side hustle out of my apartment. It's really sweet that Natalie calls herself an entrepreneur, Cassandra had told Ryan's parents during their first meeting. We all have to start somewhere, and she's definitely trying to build something. I just hope she doesn't get discouraged when she realizes how competitive the event planning industry really is. My living situation was another major source of their pity. Because I drove a practical car and dressed in simple, understated clothing, they'd concluded that I was struggling financially and probably living paycheck to paycheck. My mother had actually offered to help me with rent payments on 3 separate occasions. Cassandra had given me gift cards to Target and TJ Maxx for Christmas, with notes about helping you get some nice things for your place without breaking your budget. My social life was perhaps the most frustrating misconception of all. The fact that I didn't date publicly or bring romantic partners to family events had convinced them that I was either too busy working multiple jobs to have a personal life or struggling with social anxiety that prevented me from forming meaningful relationships. "Poor Natalie," Caroline Pemberton had whispered to her husband during the bridal shower, clearly thinking I couldn't hear her. 29 and still single. It must be so difficult watching her younger sister get married while her own life seems so unsettled. The financial assumptions were the most elaborate part of their constructed narrative. They'd built an entire theory about my supposed money problems based purely on surface-level observations that they'd completely misinterpreted.
I shopped at Target and Costco instead of Nordstrom and Whole Foods. I brought homemade gifts to family occasions instead of expensive store-bought ones. I consistently declined expensive group dinners and elaborate family vacation plans. To them, this pattern looked exactly like someone living paycheck to paycheck and trying to hide their financial limitations. The reality was that I developed these habits during my business's early years when every single dollar needed to be reinvested for growth, and they'd simply become my personal lifestyle preferences. Why spend $180 on a dinner when a $35 meal would be just as satisfying? Why buy an $800 purse when a $75 one served exactly the same function? Cassandra had been particularly vocal about her concerns regarding my financial future. I honestly worry about Natalie's long-term security, she told our parents 8 months ago during a family dinner I'd missed due to a client crisis. She's almost 30 and she has no real savings, no investment portfolio, no clear career trajectory. What's going to happen when she gets older and can't keep up with the physical demands of setting up events and coordinating vendors? Physical demands of event setup. She genuinely believed I was still personally moving tables, hanging decorations, and setting up sound systems like some kind of part-time party coordinator. The most frustrating aspect of their misconceptions was how they'd systematically rewritten history to fit their established narrative about my life. When I'd bought my house 4 years ago, I'd invited the entire family over for a housewarming party, expecting them to recognize it as a clear sign of financial success. Instead of celebrating my achievement, they'd convinced themselves that I was either house-sitting for wealthy clients or had gotten dangerously overextended with a mortgage I couldn't realistically afford. "It's a gorgeous house," my father had said carefully during that party, clearly thinking I couldn't hear her. 29 and still single. It must be so difficult watching her younger sister get married, while her own life seems so unsettled. The financial assumptions were the most elaborate part of their constructed narrative. They'd built an entire theory about my supposed money problems based purely on surface-level observations that they'd completely misinterpreted. I shopped at Target and Costco instead of Nordstrom and Whole Foods. I brought homemade gifts to family occasions instead of expensive store-bought ones. I consistently declined expensive group dinners and elaborate family vacation plans. To them, this pattern looked exactly like someone living paycheck to paycheck and trying to hide their financial limitations. The reality was that I developed these habits during my business's early years when every single dollar needed to be reinvested for growth, and they'd simply become my personal lifestyle preferences. Why spend $180 on a dinner when a $35 meal would be just as satisfying? Why buy an $800 purse when a $75 one served exactly the same function? Cassandra had been particularly vocal about her concerns regarding my financial future. I honestly worry about Natalie's long-term security. She's almost 30 and she has no real savings, no investment portfolio, no clear career trajectory. What's going to happen when she gets older and can't keep up with the physical demands of setting up events and coordinating vendors?
Cassandra had actually complimented me once on how put together I managed to look, considering your circumstances. The circumstances she was referring to were completely imaginary, but her perception of my financial limitations had colored every interaction we'd had for years. The Ryan situation had made everything exponentially worse. From the moment Cassandra had started dating him 18 months ago, she'd become hyper-aware of how our entire family would appear to his wealthy, well-connected parents. She'd actually coached our parents on appropriate conversation topics for family gatherings, specifically instructed them to avoid mentioning certain relatives who didn't meet her social standards, and had given everyone explicit directions to keep any discussions about my career as vague as possible. "Just say Natalie works in events," she'd told them before Ryan's first family dinner with us. "Don't get into specifics about her company or her role. The Pembertons move in circles where people have very particular ideas about success and professional achievement. I don't want them to feel uncomfortable or sorry for us because of Natalie's situation." Feel sorry for us. She was genuinely worried that having a sister who appeared to be professionally unsuccessful would reflect poorly on her own social standing and marriage prospects.
The most painful part of their constructed narrative was how they'd decided I was bitter and resentful about everyone else's achievements. When I didn't gush enthusiastically over Cassandra's engagement ring, her promotion to senior marketing coordinator, or her new townhouse purchase, they interpreted my measured responses as jealousy or deep-seated resentment about my own perceived failures. Natalie's having a really difficult time with my engagement, Cassandra had confided to our mother 6 months ago. I think seeing me succeed professionally and personally is bringing up a lot of feelings about her own situation. She's probably comparing her life to mine and feeling left behind or inadequate. Left behind by someone whose biggest professional accomplishment was implementing a social media strategy that had been developed by her company's corporate marketing team in Chicago. Inadequate compared to someone who managed a $2.3 million annual budget for regional pharmaceutical advertising campaigns, while I was overseeing a business empire that generated more revenue in a single quarter than her entire company made in a year. What they fundamentally didn't understand was that I wasn't bitter about anyone's success. I was genuinely happy for Cassandra's engagement and career progress. What I couldn't tolerate was being consistently dismissed, patronized, and excluded based on assumptions that were not only wrong, but completely ridiculous. While they were having lengthy phone conversations about wedding flowers and seating arrangements, I was negotiating acquisition deals for luxury properties and managing a company that employed 312 people across 15 venues. While they were discussing Ryan's promising career trajectory in pharmaceutical sales, I was reviewing financial reports that showed my company's revenue had increased by 420% over the past 4 years. The breaking point had been building for weeks before that devastating bridal shower announcement. It had started when Cassandra had asked me to be her maid of honor, but then gradually began placing restrictions on what that role would entail. First, she'd suggested that maybe I shouldn't give a speech at the reception because not everyone is comfortable with public speaking. Then she'd mentioned that she'd prefer if I wore my hair in a more polished style for the wedding photos. Finally, she'd asked if I could maybe borrow something a little more formal instead of buying a new dress for the rehearsal dinner. Each suggestion had been delivered with fake concern for my comfort and budget, but the underlying message was crystal clear. She was embarrassed by how she thought I would appear to her new in-laws and their social circle. The final straw had come during the venue walkthrough at Grandview Gardens 3 weeks before the bridal shower. Cassandra, Ryan, both sets of parents, and I had met with the venue coordinator to finalize details for the wedding reception. As we'd walked through the gardens and ballroom, Caroline Pemberton had made casual conversation about the other weddings they'd attended at various exclusive venues. The Henderson wedding at Silverstone Country Club was absolutely stunning, and the Morrison celebration at Willowcrest Manor last year was just breathtaking. These premium venues really do make such a difference in creating the right atmosphere for important celebrations. I'd listened to her praise Willowcrest Manor, my property, managed by my staff, coordinated by my events team, while standing next to family members who pitied me for my perceived professional inadequacies. The irony had been almost unbearable. Later that same afternoon, as we'd discussed final arrangements, Cassandra had pulled me aside for what she'd called a sisterly conversation about expectations. What followed was a carefully worded request that I try to blend in during the wedding weekend and avoid drawing attention to myself or my situation. She just wants everything to be perfect, she explained. Ryan's family is very image conscious, and I need to make sure that nothing disrupts the elegant atmosphere we're trying to create. You understand, right? This is the most important day of my life. That night, I'd gone home to my waterfront estate, sat in my home office surrounded by contracts worth millions of dollars, and realized that my own sister would rather I disappear entirely than risk having her new in-laws discover that she had a family member who didn't meet their standards for success.
The voice message that had started this entire crisis had come exactly 1 week after that conversation. Cassandra had clearly been building up the courage to uninvite me completely, and she'd finally decided that her wedding would be more perfect without the embarrassing sister who might make wealthy people uncomfortable with awkward conversations about failed career prospects. As I'd listened to that message, something inside me had shifted permanently. For 7 years, I'd allowed my family to maintain their misconceptions about my life because it had seemed easier than constantly defending my achievements or proving my success. I'd told myself that their opinions didn't matter as long as I was building something meaningful. But being excluded from my sister's wedding because she was ashamed of what she thought my life looked like had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed.
This wasn't just about misconceptions anymore. This was about fundamental respect, family loyalty, and the kind of person Cassandra had revealed herself to be when she thought she had to choose between her family and her social image. That Tuesday night, sitting in my office with Cassandra's voice message still echoing in my mind, I'd made a decision that would change everything. I'd picked up my phone and called Trevor Martinez, my operations manager at Grandview Gardens. "Trevor," I'd said quietly, "I need you to contact the Blackwell-Pemberton wedding party first thing tomorrow morning. Full cancellation, effective immediately, with a complete refund processed within 24 hours. "Boss, that's going to create some serious complications," he'd replied. "Everything's already set up. Vendors are confirmed, staff is scheduled, flowers are ordered. The wedding's in 10 days. "I understand the complications," I'd said, feeling strangely calm about what I was about to unleash. "Handle it professionally, but make it absolutely clear that the cancellation is coming directly from ownership level. And, Trevor, make sure they understand that Grandview Gardens will not be available for any future events involving the Blackwell or Pemberton families." "Got it. Should I provide them with alternative venue recommendations?" I'd paused, thinking about Cassandra's voice message, about years of condescension and pity, about being deemed unworthy to attend a celebration at a venue I owned. No, and no alternative recommendations. They're on their own. Now, 12 hours later, as I prepared for the chaos that was about to engulf my family's perfectly planned wedding weekend, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: the satisfaction of finally revealing exactly who they'd been underestimating all along. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 39 text messages. But before dealing with the chaos that Trevor had undoubtedly unleashed, I wanted to understand exactly how my family had constructed their version of my life over the years, because their assumptions were so far from reality that it was almost impressive in its complete inaccuracy. The first sign of the storm came through a frantic call from Cassandra at 7:23 a.m. Her voice was barely coherent through tears and panic. "Natalie, something terrible has happened. Grandview Gardens called this morning and canceled our wedding. They said there was some kind of ownership decision and they can't honor our contract. The wedding is in 9 days and we have nowhere to go." I let her talk for several minutes, listening to her describe the impossible situation she suddenly found herself in. The vendors were confused, the guests would need to be notified, and alternative venues were either completely booked or completely inappropriate for the elegant celebration she'd planned. "It's the KG tour, she continued, her voice breaking. "You work in events. You must know people, have connections. Can you help us find somewhere else, please?" The irony was absolutely perfect. The sister who had excluded me from her wedding for not being successful enough was now begging me to use my professional connections to save her celebration. What she didn't realize was that my professional connections included owning the venue she had just lost. By 10:30 a.m., the family crisis management operation was in full swing. My parents had driven over to Cassandra's townhouse to help coordinate emergency venue searches. Ryan's parents had canceled their planned spa day to make phone calls to every contact they could think of. The entire extended family had been mobilized to find alternative locations for 180 guests on 9 days' notice. What they didn't understand was that premium venues capable of hosting elegant weddings for that many people on such short notice essentially didn't exist. The few places that might theoretically have availability weren't the kind of locations where people wanted to celebrate dream weddings. My cousin David had found a hotel conference room that could accommodate the guest count, but the space was designed for corporate meetings, not romantic celebrations. The walls were beige, the lighting was fluorescent, and the view looked out onto a parking lot filled with delivery trucks. My Aunt Sarah had located a community center that claimed to have availability, but further investigation revealed that their availability was actually their gymnasium with folding tables and metal chairs. The venue coordinator had cheerfully explained that they could dress it up with some white tablecloths and maybe rent some plants. But the most telling sign of their desperation was Dr. Pemberton's suggestion that they consider having the entire celebration at their house. Kenneth Pemberton, who had spent months bragging about exclusive venues and high-end events, was now proposing that his son's wedding reception be held in a suburban backyard with a rented tent and a DJ instead of the live band they'd booked. As the day progressed, the pressure built toward an inevitable breaking point. Phone calls became increasingly frantic, options became increasingly limited, and blame began to shift toward finding someone responsible for the disaster.
That's when I received a call from my mother that would set everything in motion. Natalie, I know you're busy, but we need your help. This is a family emergency. Cassandra's wedding is falling apart, and we need you to use whatever connections you have in the event planning industry. What kind of help are you looking for? I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. Venue recommendations, vendor contacts, anything that might help us salvage the situation. I know you've said your company is small, but surely you must know other event planners who work with better venues. That's when I made the decision that would change everything they thought they knew about their family dynamics. Actually, Mom, I think we need to have a family meeting to discuss this situation properly. Can you get everyone together for a conference call at 2 p.m.? A conference call? Natalie, we don't need a meeting, we need action. We need venue options. Trust me, I said. This call will provide exactly the kind of venue options you're looking for. But I think everyone should be included. You, Dad, Cassandra, Ryan, and his parents. What's happening with the wedding affects everyone. 2 hours later, I dialed into a conference call that would systematically destroy every assumption my family had built about my life over the past 7 years. The timing was perfect. 9 days before Cassandra's wedding was supposed to begin, just enough time for the full implications to sink in, but not enough time for them to forget the panic they'd experienced. Good afternoon, everyone, I began as the call connected. Thank you for joining on such short notice. I know you're all dealing with a very stressful situation regarding the venue cancellation. I could hear shuffling and whispered conversations from their end as they positioned themselves around the speakerphone. They were expecting me to provide contact information for other event planners, maybe some suggestions for alternative venues that my small company had worked with before. Before we discuss solutions, I continued, I think it's important that everyone understands exactly what happened with Grandview Gardens and why the cancellation occurred. We know what happened, Ryan's voice came through with barely controlled frustration. They said there was some kind of ownership decision. We don't need explanations, we need alternatives. Actually, I said, I don't think you fully understand the ownership decision that was made. Let me clarify that for you. That's when I introduced Trevor Martinez, my operations manager, who had been standing by for this exact moment. Everyone, I'd like you to speak with Trevor Martinez, who can provide details about the venue cancellation. Trevor's voice came through with crisp, professional authority. Good afternoon. I'm the operations manager for Pinnacle Hospitality Group, which owns and operates Grandview Gardens along with 14 other premium venues across 3 states. 14 other venues. I heard someone whisper, "What?" in the background. The cancellation was authorized directly by our founder and CEO as part of a policy decision regarding family conflicts that might impact our venue's reputation for providing stress-free celebrations. I'm sorry, Dr. Pemberton's voice carried confusion and growing concern, but what does this have to do with our daughter-in-law's family? That's when I ended the suspense that had been building for 7 years. The founder and CEO that Trevor is referring to is me. I'm Natalie Blackwell, and I own Grandview Gardens. I personally authorized the cancellation of your wedding. The explosion of voices was immediate and chaotic. I heard Cassandra scream, my mother gasp, and several people talking at once in voices too overlapping and emotional to distinguish individual words. But underneath it all, I heard Caroline Pemberton's voice, sharp with shock and disbelief. That's impossible. You work for some small local company. Trevor stepped in to provide the supporting details that would make denial impossible.
For context, Pinnacle Hospitality Group was founded 7 years ago and currently employs 312 people across our properties. Our annual revenue last year was $47.3 million, with projected growth to $62 million this year. $62 million. While they'd been worrying about my ability to pay rent, I'd been running a business that generated more revenue than most small cities. Additionally, Trevor continued, our client base includes Fortune 500 corporations, government agencies, and high-profile private clients. Ms. Blackwell personally coordinated Governor Richardson's daughter's wedding last spring, which was featured in Architectural Digest and Southern Weddings magazine. Governor Richardson's daughter's wedding, the event that had required security clearances, international protocol coordination, and had been attended by senators, foreign diplomats, and business leaders whose names appeared regularly in national news. But it was Trevor's next revelation that truly drove home the scope of what they'd been dismissing. I should also mention that Willowcrest Manor, the venue that Dr. and Mrs. Pemberton inquired about, is also owned by Pinnacle Hospitality Group. Miss Blackwell made the decision 18 months ago to limit bookings there to 12 ultra-premium events per year. Willowcrest Manor, the venue Caroline had described as so exclusive that they'd been turned away. The venue that was supposedly above their social and financial level. I'd owned it all along. The silence that followed wasn't just shock. It was the sound of an entire family's understanding of reality crashing down simultaneously. 7 years of assumptions, 7 years of pity, 7 years of condescension, all of it revealed as completely embarrassingly wrong.
Now, I said, my voice carrying an authority they never heard before. Let's address this specific situation with Cassandra's wedding. The cancellation wasn't arbitrary or based on any venue policy. It was a direct business response to being told that I wasn't suitable to attend a family celebration because my presence might make successful people uncomfortable. I paused to let that sink in. When family members decide that someone doesn't represent the family well enough to attend weddings, they might want to investigate that person's actual professional standing before making exclusion decisions. The weight of Cassandra's voice message was hitting them now. Every dismissive comment, every assumption about my inadequacy, every decision to exclude me because I wasn't successful enough, all of it was being revealed as attacks on someone who controlled exactly what they needed most. I own the venue where you planned your dream wedding, I continued. I have exclusive relationships with the vendors you've been trying to coordinate with. I have connections to every alternative venue you've been desperately calling. When you decided I wasn't good enough to attend your wedding, you were excluding the person who controlled your entire celebration. The silence that followed my revelation stretched for nearly 2 full minutes. I could hear breathing, occasional whispered words, and what sounded like someone crying softly in the background. Probably Cassandra, finally understanding the magnitude of what she'd lost through her own actions and assumptions. When voices finally returned to the call, they came in fragments of disbelief and dawning comprehension. Natalie? My father's voice was barely above a whisper. Are you saying that you've owned these venues all along? That when we've been worried about your career, you've been running a multi-million-dollar company? That's exactly what I'm saying, Dad. For 7 years, while this family has been constructing explanations for my supposed struggles, I've been building something that none of you ever bothered to investigate or understand. Dr. Pemberton's voice came through with a tremor that suggested he was recalculating everything he thought he knew about social hierarchies and family dynamics. When we inquired about Willowcrest Manor and were told it was fully booked, you were turned away because your initial inquiry came through a budget planning service that didn't meet our minimum standards for client coordination. Willowcrest Manor only accepts 12 weddings per year, and we work exclusively with planning firms that specialize in ultra-premium events. The implications were sinking in now. The venue they'd considered beyond their reach, the exclusivity they'd been impressed by, the social status they felt rejected from, all of it had been controlled by the family member they deemed unsuccessful enough to exclude from their celebration. Natalie, Cassandra's voice came through broken and desperate. I had no idea. We had no idea. If you'd known I was successful, you would have treated me with respect.
If you'd known I had money, you would have valued my presence at your wedding? That's exactly the problem, Cassandra. Your respect was conditional on your perception of my status, not on our relationship as sisters. The truth of that statement hung in the air like a toxic cloud. They were beginning to understand that this wasn't just about a venue cancellation or a business revelation. This was about fundamental values, family loyalty, and the kind of people they'd revealed themselves to be when they thought they had to choose between family and social image. My mother's voice came through with something approaching desperation. "Sweetheart, we love you. We've always loved you. We were worried about you. We thought you were struggling, and we wanted to help you." Mom, you weren't worried about me struggling. You were embarrassed by what you thought my struggles said about our family. There's a difference between concern and shame, and what I experienced from this family was shame. That's when I made the decision that would define our relationships going forward. After 7 years of hiding my success to avoid their judgment, after months of watching them plan a celebration they didn't want me to attend, after being excluded from my own sister's wedding because of their misconceptions, I was going to demonstrate exactly what power looked like when it was used with intention. "Here's what I'm prepared to offer," I said, my voice carrying an authority they never heard before. "Pinnacle Hospitality Group will provide Willowcrest Manor for your wedding. It's our most exclusive property, the one you originally wanted but couldn't access. We'll coordinate with all your vendors to ensure seamless service, upgraded amenities at no additional cost, and personally guarantee that this will be the most elegant wedding celebration you could ever imagine." I could hear excited whispers starting in the background. They thought I was about to save them, about to provide a fairy tale ending to their crisis. "However," I continued, and that single word cut through their growing relief like ice. "This offer comes with conditions that are absolutely non-negotiable." The excitement stopped immediately. The silence returned, tense with anticipation and fear. First, I will not be attending this wedding. Not because I'm not invited, but because I'm choosing not to celebrate with people who spent 7 years pitying me for failures that didn't exist, while ignoring success that exceeded anything any of you have achieved. The weight of that choice settled over the call. They would get their dream wedding, more beautiful than they had originally planned, provided by the sister they deemed unworthy to attend it. Second, this family will acknowledge publicly that your assumptions about my life have been completely wrong. You'll explain to your guests, your friends, and Ryan's family that the venue upgrade is being provided by your sister's company, and you'll do so without minimizing what that means about the business I've built.
I paused to let that requirement sink in. They would have to admit their mistakes publicly in front of the very people they'd been trying to impress. Third, this is the last time Pinnacle Hospitality Group will provide services for this family. After Saturday, our business relationship ends permanently. You'll have had the wedding you wanted, but you'll have it without the ongoing relationship with the person who made it possible. The finality of that statement was unmistakable. This wasn't just about one wedding or one business transaction. This was about the permanent consequences of their choices and assumptions. "The decision is yours," I concluded. "You can have the most elegant venue in the region, coordinated by the most successful hospitality company in 3 states, provided by someone who won't be there to make anyone uncomfortable with her presence. Think it over, and have Trevor your answer by 5 p.m. today." The call ended at 3:47 p.m., and by 4:15 p.m., Trevor had received a call accepting every condition I'd outlined. 6 months later, I sat in my office reviewing expansion plans for properties in North Carolina when my assistant announced that I had a visitor. Cassandra stood in the doorway, looking around at the floor-to-ceiling windows, the custom furniture, and the wall of awards that told the story of Pinnacle Hospitality Group's rise to industry leadership. "I've never actually seen your office," she said quietly. "I mean, I knew you had an office, but I imagined something like a cubicle in a shared workspace. This is incredible." The wedding had been beautiful, exactly as I'd promised. Willowcrest Manor had provided the perfect backdrop for a celebration that exceeded every expectation Cassandra and Ryan had held. The photographs had been featured in 2 regional magazines, and Caroline Pemberton had spent months showing them to anyone who would look, proudly explaining that her son's wedding had been coordinated by one of the most exclusive event planning companies in the region. What she didn't mention in those conversations was that the exclusive event planning company was owned by the family member she'd once dismissed as unsuitable for the celebration. "How's married life?" I asked, gesturing for her to sit in one of the leather chairs facing my desk. "It's good, really good. Ryan and I are happy." I paused, looking out at the city skyline. "But I didn't come here to talk about my marriage. I came here to talk about what I did to my sister." The conversation I'd been expecting for months had finally arrived. In the immediate aftermath of the wedding revelation, family members had tried various approaches to rebuilding their relationship with me. Some had attempted to act as if nothing had changed. Others had swung to the opposite extreme, suddenly treating me with a reverence that felt almost as uncomfortable as their previous condescension. But Cassandra had taken a different path. She'd spent 6 months quietly observing, learning, and trying to understand who I actually was rather than who she assumed I was. "I've been doing research about your company, about the events you coordinate, about the industry you work in. Do you know what I discovered?" I waited, curious about what her investigation had revealed. "I discovered that my sister is one of the most respected hospitality executives on the East Coast. That Fortune 500 companies compete to book events with your company. That you've coordinated celebrations for people whose names I recognize from business magazines and political news." She pulled out her phone and showed me screenshots she'd saved. "This article, in Hospitality Management Quarterly, calls you a visionary who transformed luxury event planning through innovative client relationships. This piece, in Regional Business Review, says Pinnacle Hospitality Group sets the standard for high-end corporate and private celebrations. But here's what really hit me," she said, her voice becoming emotional. "I also discovered that you've been quietly donating to charities for years. The Children's Hospital Wing, the Scholarship Fund for first-generation college students, the Small Business Development Program that helped 5 women start their own companies." She paused, looking directly at me. "You've been using your success to help other people while your own family was assuming you needed help yourself." The transformation in her understanding was complete, but more importantly, it was genuine. She wasn't trying to reposition herself for advantage or attempting to repair relationships for social reasons. She was confronting the reality of how badly she'd misjudged someone she should have known better than anyone else. "I keep thinking about that voice message when I told you that you didn't fit the aesthetic I was going for, that your presence would make people uncomfortable with her presence. I was talking about someone who owns venues that host events for governors and CEOs. I was worried about you embarrassing me in front of people who probably would be honored to meet you." What had happened wasn't just about one wedding or one family conflict. It was about the danger of assumptions, the importance of curiosity over judgment, and the way relationships can be rebuilt when people commit to seeing each other clearly rather than maintaining comfortable misconceptions. "There's something I want to ask you," I said. "When you were planning your wedding, when you decided I didn't fit what you wanted for your celebration, what did you think success looked like?" She considered the question carefully. "I thought success looked like having the right job title, wearing the right clothes, driving the right car, living in the right neighborhood. I thought it was about appearing successful to other people who I thought mattered." "And now?"
Now, I think success looks like building something meaningful, helping other people, and having the confidence to be yourself, regardless of what other people think. I think success looks like my sister, who built a business empire while I was worried about whether she could afford nice shoes.
As Cassandra left my office that day, I realized that the most important outcome of the wedding crisis wasn't the revelation of my hidden success or the satisfaction of proving my family wrong. It was the possibility that our relationships could be rebuilt on the foundation of truth, understanding, and mutual respect. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving that people were wrong about you. Sometimes it's creating the opportunity for them to become the kind of people who would have been right about you all along. Next up, 2 more stories chosen just for you. If you enjoyed this, you'll want to see what's coming. Tap to keep going.